Today's lesson is about cells and cell organelles, and as you watch this video today, you will be filling out the chart your teacher has given you about cell organelle structure and function. Remember, you can pause at any time and replay any section that you need. So, types of cells. Prokaryotic cells are cells like this bacterial cell on the right-hand side. It doesn't have membrane-bound organelles, but like all cells, it does have ribosomes, and ribosomes make proteins. The eukaryotic cell, such as this animal cell and this plant cell, have ribosomes, but they also have membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria and Golgi apparatus and chloroplast, just to name a few. Cell size comparison. Most bacteria are 1 to 10 microns. So what's a micron? It's 1/1,000,000th of a meter. So it's really, really small. Typically, a eukaryotic cell can be about from 10 to 100 microns, but they can be as large as like an ostrich egg, which is actually one cell. So why study cells? Cells make up tissues, and tissues make up organs, and organs make up bodies. And bodies are made up of cells, and they're made up of a lot of cells. Cells do all the work of life. So what jobs do cells have to do for an organism to live? Well, breathe, gas exchange, CO2 versus oxygen, eat, take in and digest food, make energy, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, build molecules, such as proteins and carbohydrates, fats, nucleic acids like DNA and RNA. Remove waste. Control internal conditions, homeostasis, balance. Respond to external environment and build more cells. And why do you need to build more cells? To grow, to repair, reproduce, and develop. Organelles do the work of cells. Each structure has a job to do. It keeps the cell alive and keeps you alive. Cells need power. To fuel daily life and growth, the cell must take in food and digest it. Take in oxygen. Make ATP. Remove waste. Organelles that do this work, we're going to talk about the cell membrane, lysosomes, vacuoles and vesicles, and mitochondria. So the cell membrane. All cells have a cell membrane. So all prokaryote and all eukaryotic cells have a cell membrane. The function of the cell membrane is to separate the cell from the outside. It's the protector. It controls what enters or leaves the cell. O2, CO2, food, water, nutrients, waste. It controls what enters or leaves the cell. Water balance is very important for a cell. Too much water, the cell could burst and die. Recognizes signals from other cells. Allows communication between cells. The structure of a cell membrane is a double layer of fat, but it's actually a special type of fat called a phospholipid. On the right-hand side is a phospholipid. It has a phosphate head and a lipid tail. The phosphate head is actually hydrophilic, which means it loves water, and this lipid tail right here is hydrophobic, so it doesn't like water. And so when you put them together, they're actually going to go lipid tail to lipid tail. Receptor molecules can be embedded in the cell membrane, and they're made of proteins, and they're going to help with attachment like skin to skin cells to make that sheet of skin, which is our organ, or also for communication. Cell walls. The location is located outside the cell membrane, but only certain cells have a cell wall. The function, structural support and protection. It's tough and flexible, and it can prevent overexpansion when water enters the cell. Now, this is very important for plants because when the central vacuole, which we'll talk about in just a couple slides later, fills with water, it puts pressure in the cell onto that cell wall. And so you have that rigidity, which is called turgor pressure. Very important because if it didn't have that, the plant would wilt and then obviously die. And so plants have a cell wall. Fungus have a cell wall, some protists such as algae and some bacteria, but it is not found in animal cells or other protists. So cytoplasm is the next thing we're going to talk about. Cytoplasm is just basically everything in the cell, organelles, and cytosol, which I'm going to write that word for you. Cytosol is actually made up of two root words. Cyto means cell and sol means solution. So this is cell solution. And the cytosol is made up of a lot of enzymes for the cell. So vacuoles and vesicles. The function of a vacuole and vesicle is just moving materials around the cell and for storage. And what I've shown here is a diagram of a small food particle being engulfed by the cell. And it's engulfed by a process called endocytosis. And I'm going to write that word for you right now. So endocytosis, let's put it right over here, just means inside the cell. But it does take energy to engulf that cell, that food particle inside the cell. The structure is made of a membrane sac. So food and water storage. So we have plant cells, we have animal cells, and the one in the middle is actually a protista called a paramecium. So we have here in the plant cell, we have a central vacuole. And in the central vacuole, you can see that it's filled with water, so it's like a big old balloon. And in the protista, which is this guy right here, he's got a little contractile vacuole, which acts like a pump, which helps to pump out any excess water that's trying to go in, because this little protista lives in fresh water. So he's constantly having to battle water rushing into his little cell. So we've now highlighted our vacuoles and vesicles. And so let's talk about lysosomes. So we see this diagram again that we saw with the vacuoles and the vesicles. And so we have a small food particle that the cell is engulfing because it needs to feed. And it forms it into a vacuole, which was just made out of that cell membrane. And then over here, we see a lysosome. And a lysosome is a small little organelle. And in that organelle are digestive enzymes. And so what happens is it's going to fuse with this little vacuole of food and it breaks it down so the cell can eat it. So it also is going to clean up and recycle. So here looks like some broken down mitochondria, and it's going to fuse and it's going to digest it. And the reason why it's digesting is it's going to use those parts to build something else that it needs for its body, little cell body. The structure is made of a membrane sac of digestive enzymes. So lysosomes are very, very important, especially in the immune system. On the left-hand side here is white blood cells, and white blood cells have a lot of lysosomes because remember, they're going to come in contact with invading germs, bacteria and whatnot that they need to destroy, and lysosomes are going to bust open and break down that bad guy. Lysosomes can be used to kill cells when they're supposed to be destroyed. Believe it or not, we use lysosomes for proper development. Over here on the right-hand side is a little juvenile frog, and it still has its little tadpole tail. And we know that frogs don't have tails. And so what happens to it, the lysosomes will bust open and kill the cells, and it's called apoptosis, which is one of my favorite words. I think it's a super cool word. So we also see this in human development too. So here on the right hand side is a fetus, and you can see right here its little webbed fingers right here. And the reason why we don't have webbed fingers when we're born is because that webbing is lost during development, because those skin cells, the little lysosomes, will pop open and dissolve that skin. So you can see here on the left hand side what you look like at 6 weeks, and on the right hand side at 15 weeks. Now again, you can see the webbing here, and at 15 weeks you can see the actual individual fingers. And a little fun fact here, here's the heart. See how large it is? And this is little eye bud. Super cute. Now, if you do have webbing, it's called syndactyl. So sometimes there's diseases of lysosomes, and they're fatal, which means you can die from it. The digestive enzymes are not working in the lysosome, so it picks up food but can't digest it. And so what happens is the lysosome will fill up with undigested material, and it'll grow larger and larger until it disrupts cells and organ function. Because if you remember that cells make up tissues and tissues make up organs. So an example of this is a genetic disease called Tay-Sachs. The mom and the dad didn't have Tay-Sachs. They were carriers of the disease. And so there's a 25% chance their child would be born with it. And unfortunately, the child will die before they're 5 years old. It's a buildup of undigested fat in the brain cells and starts to liquefy the brain. So, lysosomes, food digestion, garbage disposal, and recycling. The next thing we're going to talk about is mitochondria. And the function is to make ATP energy from cellular respiration. So, sugar plus oxygen, ATP, that fuels the work of life. And the structure is a double membrane. It's both in animal and plant cells, but also in protist and in fungus. But you will not see mitochondria in bacterial cells. In fact, mitochondria resemble a bacteria. It has its own DNA, it's circular, it has its own ribosomes, and there's a theory called the endosymbiotic theory that perhaps a ancestral eukaryote engulfed this energy-producing bacteria, this mitochondria, and instead of digesting it, it became an organelle. And so it's called the endosymbiotic theory. This theory is also for chloroplasts as well. So mitochondria can divide when they want to divide. Again, they have their own DNA. It's circular like a bacteria, and they have their own ribosomes. So we've talked about mitochondria, and plants have mitochondria, and they also have chloroplasts, which some protists do as well. And it's making energy and sugar from sunlight. And remember, plants have to make their food, and then they have to use their food for their energy through cellular respiration. So instead of eating, they go through photosynthesis. And sugar is a stored energy, and they're going to use the energy to build leaves and roots and fruits out of the sugar. Now, plants will take in oxygen in their root system, and this is why you can kill a plant by overwatering it. When you water the plant, you're actually when you're overwatering the plant, you're actually taking spaces or air pockets of the soil, and so you're practically drowning the plant, and it can't get the oxygen it needs to go through cellular respiration. It's a little fun fact there. So again, mitochondria are both in animal and plant cells, but they're remember, mitochondria is also in protista and fungus as well. So, the great energy circle of life. So we've got the sun, photosynthesis, plants, and some protists like algae producing oxygen and glucose. Those two things are used for respiration in animals and plants and fungus and protista to make ATP. And then respiration makes CO2 and water, and then plants use that for photosynthesis. So we talked about cell wall and the cell membrane, and we talked about cytoplasm being made of cytosol and central vacuoles, which of course is like the big water balloon inside of a plant cell. It helps with turgidity, turgor pressure, and lysosomes, which are the digestion and cleanup, and mitochondria making ATP and cellular respiration, and chloroplasts make ATP and sugars in photosynthesis. So, cells need workers. Proteins. So, making proteins to run daily life and growth, the cell must read genes. Got to be able to read that blueprint. Build proteins. Structural proteins like muscle fibers, your hair, skin, claws. Enzymes. Enzymes are proteins. They help to speed up chemical reactions. They help break stuff down, put stuff together. Signals like hormones and receptors. Organelles that do this work. We're going to talk about the nucleus, ribosomes, the endoplasmic reticulum, the ER, and the Golgi apparatus. So proteins do all the work. And so this might be a little review from 6th or 7th grade. But one of the major jobs of a cell is to make proteins, because proteins do all the work, and all cells make proteins. So we have DNA here, and from DNA, we copy it with a nucleic acid called RNA. And this is called protein synthesis. We make proteins by taking that RNA, and then the ribosome will read it and direct tRNA or transfer RNA to bring down amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And then the proteins can be things for structure, enzymes, signals, receptors. So let's talk about the nucleus. The main function of the nucleus is the control center of the cell. It protects the DNA. And remember, all eukaryotes have a nucleus. The DNA is the instructions for building proteins. In the structure of the nucleus, you have a nuclear membrane that surrounds the nucleus, but inside you have another little organelle called the nucleolus, and it's right here. And it's its own separate organelle. And its function is a ribosome factory. So all eukaryotes have a nucleolus. Chromosomes are DNA. And so what happens is when DNA, before it condenses, it looks like this stringy material, but then when it condenses, it will break apart at these sections called telomeres, and they will form little X's like this. Now this is a chromosome. We have 46 of them, and this side of the chromosome is the same as this side, because before it looks like this, the DNA is duplicated, and this happens right before mitosis. So ribosomes. All cells, prokaryote and eukaryote alike, have ribosomes. So the function is protein factories. They read instructions to build proteins from DNA. The structure is 2 subunits, and they can either be free floating in the cytoplasm or they can be attached to the ER. But all cells have ribosomes. So let's talk about the endoplasmic reticulum. The function of the endoplasmic reticulum, it's part of the protein factory, but it doesn't make proteins. It just helps to complete the process. It also makes membranes. Now, there are two types of endoplasmic reticulum. There's the rough, which is ribosomes are attached to it, and it works on proteins. It's also kind of like this highway of the cell. And the smooth ER makes membranes, which is super important for a cell, especially when a cell is growing or it's repairing a damaged membrane. It helps with lipid synthesis, which means it makes fats. And if you remember, the phospholipid bilayer is a particular fat. Drug detoxification. You know that your organ for drug detox is your liver. And so if you looked at a liver cell and compared it to a skin cell, it's going to have a lot more smooth ER, the liver cell will, than versus the skin cell. And also carbohydrate metabolism, so breaking down glucose and disaccharides and polysaccharides, those are all carbohydrates. So the Golgi apparatus is the next one, and its function is to finish, sort, and label and ship proteins. It's like the UPS headquarters, the shipping and receiving department. So it ships proteins in vesicles. They're like the UPS truck. So I've got my little package, it's my protein, and I need to ship it to my grandma's house. Well, in this case, it's going to ship it outside the cell. So if it's a cell that makes proteins, it's the pancreas, which makes lots and lots of different enzymes, and enzymes are proteins. We're going to be doing a lot of shipping of that protein outside that cell. The structure is a membrane sac. And if you can see here on the right, here is the Golgi apparatus, and here's those little vesicles carrying the proteins. So this is a basic kind of a flow chart of protein synthesis. So we have the nucleus, and inside the nucleus we have the DNA, and we have RNA here, and RNA's job is to copy that certain code on the DNA, that little part of the blueprint of the protein we want. So if we think about a blueprint as a blueprint of an entire house, and I just want my bathroom, I'm just going to copy the blueprint part of my bathroom. So the RNA does that. It will leave the nucleus and it will go find a ribosome. And it happens to find a ribosome that's attached to the ER here. It's going to go down. The ribosome is going to read that blueprint and it's going to direct transfer RNA to bring down amino acids. And the amino acids I have here with little squares. Do you see them? Okay, and they're just attached in a row. So now it is a protein chain, but it's not functional. It has to be processed. So as it goes through the endoplasmic reticulum, it's going to pop out in a vesicle. So it's going down that little highway, the ER. It pops out in a little vesicle. And then the vesicle will go to the Golgi apparatus. Now watch what happens to that protein as it goes through the Golgi apparatus. It's changed. Do you see it? It's kind of folded onto itself in a 3D structure, which now makes that protein functional. So this could be like anything, a hormone, an enzyme, whatnot. Now, as it leaves the Golgi apparatus, it's going to come out in a vesicle, and it's going to be tagged. Usually it's a little carbohydrate tags, like a little name tag or a little to and from tag that says where it needs to go. And either it's going to leave the cell or it's going to be used within the cell. And there it goes. The protein's on its way. Here's another chart, and if you want to pause this, you can and look at it a little bit more closely. This just goes exactly what we just went over. So we talked about the nucleus, the endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, and the Golgi apparatus. So cells need to make more cells. Making more cells to replace, repair, and grow, they must copy their DNA, make extra organelles, and divide the DNA and new organelles between two new daughter cells. Remember, this is called mitosis. Probably learned this in middle school, but if I'm going to replicate, I need to make extra copies of everything that I already have. So here's a cell, and we've seen it dividing into 2 new cells. Organelles that are going to do this is the nucleus and centrioles. So centrioles function, help coordinate cell division. The structure, there's 1 pair in each cell, and it's going to be really close to where the location of the nucleus is. There's a motor protein that's going to help pull the chromosomes apart with spindle fibers. And I'll show you in this little animation. It pulls it apart. So here, this would be the chromosomes. And remember what we said before, when we look at the X, this side and this side are exactly the same. DNA has to replicate first before you can divide a cell. So there's our centrioles. And so the cell summary, cells have 3 main jobs. Make energy, make proteins, and make more cells. So again, make energy, need food and oxygen, cellular respiration and photosynthesis, need to remove waste. We got to make proteins, need instructions from the DNA. That's our blueprint. Need to chain together amino acids and finish and ship the protein and make more cells. Need to copy DNA and divide it up. Our organelles do all those jobs. Remember, fill out your chart, go back to the beginning if you need to, and hope that you learn something new and exciting about cells.